Olympic reader. Olympic reader. Olympic reader. Olympic reader.
Hello, hello. Testing, testing. Wanted to talk a little bit about fear. Wanted to talk about how we feel about fear in society and how it has sort of shaped so many people's perception of Christianity. A long time ago, a former colleague said several times, I think, over the course of our history, something that I think he was echoing from maybe Oprah Winfrey, and maybe this was something that Oprah Winfrey heard from Deepak Chopra type of thing. But my colleague said the opposite of love is fear. The opposite of love is not hate. He said the opposite of love is fear. And I understood him to be a Christian at the time. I'm a Christian, born again Christian. So, where he was coming from, I think whenever that was his reaction, it was to some sort of injustice that maybe we were talking about, or maybe we were co-observing. And so he would say, the opposite of love is fear. In other words, like, what is tearing people apart is fear. And it sounded fine to me at the time. And, but like as time, and I let it go. But as time moved on, I would say, it seemed wrong. There was just something that just seemed wrong about it. But again, I just let it go at the time. And it wasn't until kind of recently that I was digging into the Bible. I was listening to the Word by one of my internet pastors, Pastor Adam Fannin. Shout out to Law of Liberty Church. And this idea of being God-fearing came up, and I was introduced to Jesus at a very young age. And so I didn't get exposed to a lot of I was never exposed to a lot of fire and brimstone preaching. And if you were to ask me as a young person all the way up through my 20s, even during my late teens, early 20s, when I sort of started entering into the world and never really turned my back on Jesus, but just kind of, I think a lot of believers can identify with those times in our life when we're just absorbed in the world and Jesus isn't necessarily the first thing on our mind when we first wake up in the morning. And it's not something that any of us are proud of. It's sort of an embarrassing, cringy thing, but a lot of us go through those seasons. But even like during those times, I would have never described Christianity as fear-based. But I have to say, as much as I heard my former colleagues say something like, the opposite of love is fear, not hate, it then I and now I sort of look back and remember so many people who criticized maybe my faith personally, or they were just criticizing Christianity at all, would always would often, I should say that it's like a fear-based religion. There's so much fear mongering going on, and any god that wants you to fear him, that would be like disgusting, or like how could anybody love a god who wants you to fear him? And that, oh, again, sort of like how my colleague said that statement, that producing that dichotomy, when people would say that to me growing up, I never it again it never kind of it just never really hit me. I guess I just would hear their words and feel secure in my faith, and I didn't really have a gift for like preaching or like spreading a message as a young I guess as a young person. Um and so I just let it go. But now when I think about it again, I say, I would have never at my even lowest moment described life as a Christian as like fear based or like dark. But but then, by that same token, I am um provoked by this memory that I have of my dad, um who worked for many years as an arborist, climbing trees hundreds of feet tall with his colleagues, all climbing these humongous trees, all in order to maintain them, uh, but risking his life nevertheless. And it was always sort of pertinent, his message to me, because growing up, I was never any good, mind you, but always interested in extreme sports, always like involved in skateboarding, BMX, rollerblading, whatever. And my friends and I would always be building ramps and stuff to jump off of, launch ourselves off of. And so the advice that my dad gave me as somebody who worked with his hands, worked in sort of a blue collar environment where people took their lives into their own hands to bring home the bacon, he would say to me, "Son, fear is your friend. Fear can be your friend, but it was most often than not, fear is your friend." So, and I got the gospels, like I said, at a very young age. And I grew up in a very joy filled church, not real progressive or liberal necessarily, but just like a very charismatic church. And the fire and brimstone preaching just sort of missed me if it was ever there. And so, like I said, when um, people throughout my life would draw this parallel between Christianity and fear, and then later when my former colleague said the opposite of love is fear, not hate. Um, and now, many years later, focusing on my dad's message, which is that fear is a friend, fear keeps you alive, and meditating on what the word says, opening the Bible and getting into the word, reading Proverbs, reading the Gospels, reading Acts, and Paul's letters, discussing what it really means to be fearful of God, or what it means to fear God, revere God, whatever. And I don't want to like water down the term. I want to use the word fear because that's the word that's used in the King James Version, which is my reference of the Bible. And I pulled up a whole bunch of references to being God fearing in the Bible. Um, and nowhere, and I'm not going to read all of them. I encourage everybody to get into the Bible and read them for yourself, and let the Lord speak to your heart when you read these words. I'm not a preacher or a pastor, and I'm not an academic on the Bible. I'm just a born again Christian here, that likes to share my thoughts. But there's a lot of, as you can see here, there are a lot of references to fear in the Bible and being God fearing. Now, I'll read a few of them. For one, here, Proverbs 14:27. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, to depart from the snares of death. Here, this is Proverbs 23:17. Let not thine heart envy sinners, but be thou in the fear of the Lord all the day long. And I just highlighted these three. Psalms 2:11, serve the Lord with fear and rejoice and trembling. So I highlighted these three um, for a reason that I'll sort of expand on. But one thing I'll say about all of these passages from the Bible, none of them give fire and brimstone vibes to me. None of them speak of torment or terror so much as fear, as something kind of distinct. And I can speak to that. I mean, when I was young, I had all kinds of night terrors. I suffered from pretty severe sleep paralysis, and I also come from a line in my heredity. My mom and people before her in our line, sleepwalkers, problems with sleepwalking. So I've had several embarrassing and also kind of slightly dangerous close call situations with sleepwalking as a youngster, and sleep paralysis and nightmares and then all of the other things that go along with being a young person in the world. Of course, we all kind of go through fear as we characterize fear. And so I think it's a very effective tool of the devil to draw this false definition of what fear is, and even in saying things like the opposite of love is fear, creating a false dichotomy around fear, and even playing with the word fear so that it doesn't have its own distinct meaning. And so when I say that, I'm saying, these passages in the Bible talk about fear, but they don't really talk about nightmarish torment or terror. And I think those are different things. And what I mean by that is, as a young person, I had night terrors. Well, that was something being done to me, right? I was being terrorized or tormented, and it had no purpose. I wasn't doing anything to bring those things upon myself necessarily. You could argue that, like, maybe my diet had something to do with it, or maybe there were choices that were made in terms of, like, I don't know, environmental toxins or pollutants that could have contributed to whatever issues I had as a child, and that's all choice based, sure, but still, I would say that I wasn't really that I really wouldn't categorize that critically as fear as much as I would torment. And this is similar to people who are victims of terrible crimes, violent accidents, or not like natural disasters necessarily, or even at the hands of a bully. Um, you could say that those people are afraid, but I would argue that it's more accurate to say that they're being tormented and terrified. It's terror that they're feeling. And so fear, being a friend, right? And how fear is distinct from terror and torment. So hang with me here. So I live in a town that is like a Corvette town. A lot of retirees, a lot of Corvettes, a lot of nice cars, a lot of very blingy cars, Hummers, the Hummer EVs, all that stuff. All the Tesla trucks your heart could ever want to see on the road. But we also get, like, every now and then a very exotic car. And there is one person in town who drives a very exotic car, and I'm not even sure what type of car it is. The insignia is far too rich for my education. Um, Pardon. And this person who drives his car takes up at least 2, sometimes 4 parking spaces, a quadrant of spaces that this person then parks in the middle of. And this person is doing this because their car is precious. And the sense that they're feeling, the feeling is not torment or terror, it's fear. And so they're afraid that someone will pull up beside them and carelessly open the door and nick or dent or whatever, scratch their precious, exotic, sports car, Italian sports car, who knows? It's not really torment or terror, right? Like, he's not terrorized by this. It's fear. It's a more accurate description. If somebody said, "Oh, I'm just terrorized that somebody might hurt my precious car," it just sounds funny. It sounds over the top. But if you say to me, "I'm afraid that somebody will scratch my car," that seems more realistic, because we are afraid around protecting things that are precious, right? We're afraid that something will happen to them. So it's a protective, it's a um it's just used, the word is just different. And I think in our sort of current today, in our society today, we've conflated fear with just like any old terror, any old, trauma. And I think it's distinct. Like, terror and fear are different things. They're different things. Just like wrath and anger are different in the Bible. They're distinct words in the Bible. So fear is different from torment. When I was suffering from sleep paralysis as a young person, I was tormented. That wasn't a fear of something that I could avoid, in essence. It was a torment that I felt like I had no control over something. So, if this man had something precious like a car that, well, it's kind of a silly example using a car, but, if this man, instead of a car, if it was something that was precious that he felt he had no control over protecting, that it could be taken from him at any time, then it becomes traumatic and it becomes more of a torment. So again, fear. So, when my buddies and I are putting together a ramp that we were going to jump off of or something stupid without helmets, or like without even being aware of our surroundings, my dad would remind me that fear is a friend. Fear is going to keep me safe and will keep him alive to see another day when he's out risking his life to bring home the bacon to provide for our family. So when he's tying a knot or tying himself in with his harness, fear might cause him to slow down a little bit and reflect on what he's doing. So it's his friend. It keeps him from the flames of hell, right? That's how the Bible is describing fear. So looking at some of these passages that I highlighted for myself, pardon, my allergies this year are out of control. So I have like the grossest post-nasal drip you'd ever heard of. I am not in fear of it. I am tormented by it. So the fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, to depart from the snares of death. So fear is literally a direction on a compass that points home. And when we don't live, literally, when we don't live in fear, which is a form of sensitivity, right? It's a sense. When we don't have that sense, then we are in danger of sliding down the slippery slope, because we acknowledge as Christians, especially born again Christians who believe in a faith alone doctrine, once you're saved, right? You're sealed unto the Lord, but the world is a slippery slope, and we are saved, we are forgiven every time we lose our footing, but the way we lose our footing is by not not following the spidey senses of this is going to get me into trouble. And that could be in all different ways. And this might be a topic that I talk more about, but because there's so many different things that could be topics of conversation in and of themselves, that I don't, but yeah, staying focused here. If we don't follow that fear of, our senses feeling the heat of the flames, then we will slide all the way down the hill, right? We will just completely lose traction because fear is that traction. Fear is that mechanism that slows you down so that you can use your discernment and keep your focus on Jesus, right? And live in fear and reverence of God's grace for giving us a gift of eternal salvation, something that we really don't deserve. So fear, it keeps you alive. And here in Proverbs 14:27, the fear of the Lord is a fountain of life. When we think of a fountain, that's brimming. That's like brimming with the Holy Spirit. We think of abundance. It's a cornucopian thought, a cornucopian concept of like a fountain overflowing, a well. And so it's a very positive thing. And so this is just one instance where fear and the concept of a fountain, something that's abundant. Fear is abundance, we see, which is like very perpendicular to how society fears fear itself today. As Bubblegum Wisdom would say, as my former colleague said, love is the opposite of love is fear. No, that's a flawed statement. Proverbs 23:17, let not thine heart envy sinners, but be thou in the fear of the Lord all the day long. So this is just, again, looking at, like, when you envy sinners, that's literally the opposite direction of fear. Because what you're doing is you're lusting after sins of the flesh, the ways of the lost world. And it's drawing you out of fear with a seduction. So this is just, to me, I hear this as seduction will turn you away from fear. And that will be, again, leading to sliding down that slippery slope, not having a foothold. And then another passage that just explicitly couples the idea of fear with something positive, Psalms 2:11, serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. So this describes gratitude. This describes awe. This doesn't describe torment. This describes the sort of anxiety you have when you go to a fireworks show, or you're going to a massive concert, or there's just a big deal happening. It's awe and shock and reverence. So there are a lot of, and then this is where I have some the Gospels pasted in. And even in the book of Revelation, fear is described plainly and without any flowery poetry, no padding, if you will, but definitely not the kind of fire and brimstone torment that the propagandizing lost world will have you believe. Fear of God, the biblical description of fear, the context the Bible takes on fear is the type of fear we have when we want very passionately to protect something that is precious. Like the person in my town with the exotic sports car who takes up an entire quadrant of parking spaces. That person is living in a type of fear to protect what's precious to him, which is a worldly item. But I argue, and we all can relate to this because, we all have $700, $1,200 phones that we definitely will pay for, screen protectors, cases. We take care of them. We always know where our phone is. It's precious because we're afraid of losing it, afraid of it breaking. Wouldn't necessarily say that we're tormented. Well, some might be tormented if they're like really, really gacked out of their mind on their phone, just total addict. But most healthy people aren't tormented or terrorized by the idea of their phone being broken or their expensive electronic gadget being broken. It's more of a fear. We're afraid of it being broken. We're afraid of it being taken away. That might change to torment if it was something that we couldn't control, something that we couldn't take measures to protect. Then it might feel more like torment or terror, especially if it was something being done to us, done to an individual, like repeated theft or any kind of repeated violation. Somebody starts to feel like they're losing control. But that's not the type of sense that we should have of God. This isn't a God that just torments you. That's not it. This is a God who has given you senses to know the direction of home versus the opposite of home, being completely lost. And so it's the fear is a sense to actually help you to avoid torment. So that's my little rant on my ideas of fear, the way society sees fear, especially today. We live in a very kid glove society. People generally don't like to be offended. People don't like to be uncomfortable. We have some countries reaching negative population because people are not gambling, taking that risk to rub shoulders and meet people. We have people paralyzed in terror, paralyzed in anxiety, yet because of this whole twist, and in spite of this whole, or I should say because of this whole twist on what fearing God really is, right? So people run away from what's good for them because it has been conflated with what they want relief from. And so fearing God will relieve the lost world of the torment that not only that they feel today, that, so many people feel a vacuum inside and don't know how to fix it. So they chase pharmaceuticals, they chase various, pleasures of the flesh or relief, different forms of different forms of relief that the world provides, because they've been because they've been taught that the Bible isn't really viable because it is teaching people to have fear, and fear is the enemy. Fear, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. And then these sort of Deepak Chopra style tomes, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is fear. Therefore, what you oppress is what you fear, as if God oppresses us, therefore we must fear him. That is like this total false construct, false paradigm to really, it's a conspiracy to dissuade the lost world from the word of God. So thanks a lot again for hanging out. Those of you who do choose to stick around for this whole video, if you want to go ahead and support the channel, I do have a new album out. It's on Spotify, everywhere you can stream music, but there was a little bit of confusion with like my Spotify artist profile. I featured on a whole bunch of people's songs in the past, but didn't have my own solo work out. So before, it's like a real clean presentation over on Spotify, and I think YouTube Music is sort of the same thing. I have to send them an email with all of these links to all of the different works that I have out there. So anyway, in the meantime, the best, most convenient way to support me and all of my media ventures is to just support me directly on Bandcamp, where you can buy the album. It does come with 3 bonus tracks. If you do support me on, do choose to support me on Bandcamp, it does come with 3 bonus tracks not available on Spotify or YouTube Music or Apple Music and yada yada. All right, thanks so much again for your time. Anyone who chose to stick with me, I do encourage everybody to look up these passages. Bible study couldn't be any easier today with Mistral, ChatGPT, Perplexity. It is so easy to just say, hey, give me everywhere in the Bible it says this, that, and the other from this version of the Bible. Of course, my preference is for King James, but I mean, talk about like the most easy and effective Bible concordance ever. But yeah.
Olympic reader. Olympic reader. Olympic reader.